I would love to be having a front page of the Telegraph with a plane taking off to Rwanda. That's my dream.
People who are coming here illegally are breaking our laws. They are criminals and they don't have a right to be here. That is at odds with our values. I say visit Rochdale, visit Telford. The grooming gang scandal is a stain on this country.
Certain ethnic groups, and I say British Pakistani males, who hold cultural values totally at odds with British values, who see women in a demeaned and illegitimate way and pursue an outdated and frankly heinous approach in terms of the way they behave.
Well, she was
It has been argued that Suella Braverman has become one of the UK's most outspoken racists. So who is this woman and what is her role as a woman of colour in the Conservative Party?
Come with us now on a journey through time and space.
Suella Braverman was born and brought up in London to parents of Goan and Tamil ethnicity who emigrated from Mauritius and Kenya in the 1960s. Her mother was one of the many women from the so-called Commonwealth countries who were actively recruited by the NHS to come to the UK to fill in staff shortages. Her mother then became a Conservative councillor who ran to become a Member of Parliament, and her father worked for a housing association. Suella trained in law at Cambridge University, then she did a Master's in European and French law in Paris before she then qualified as an attorney in New York. Her political career rose very quickly. She was first elected to the House of Commons in 2015 to represent the district of Fareham, but it is reported that she made multiple unsuccessful attempts at getting elected elsewhere. Only 5 years later, in February 2022, she was appointed as the Attorney General, which is the chief legal advisor to the Crown for England and Wales. 2 years later, she then unsuccessfully ran for the Conservative leadership in the summer of 2022, but she was appointed as Home Secretary by Liz Truss. However, she was forced to resign after only 6 weeks for a breach of the ministerial code, in which she sent an official document from her personal email. However, she was reappointed in the same position just 10 days later by the newly chosen Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. Suella took over after the previous Home Secretary, Priti Patel, had initiated the $140 million deal with Rwanda to relocate asylum seekers as part of their migration and economic development partnership. This plan has been blocked for legal reasons and, as Suella says in one of her interviews, they are currently embroiled in the High Courts. This was after it was at the end of 2022 at the Conservative annual conference where she talked about her so-called famous dream to be able to send asylum seekers to Rwanda.
It's a deeply entrenched and complex problem. That's a simple answer. And I would love to be here saying, claiming victory. I would love to be having a front page of the Telegraph with a plane taking off to Rwanda. That's my dream. It's
when will that happen?
When will it happen? Listen, you've got to ask the courts about that.
By Christmas?
That would be amazing, but if I'm honest, I think it's going to take long. I think, we've got to come out of the legal dispute that we are currently embroiled in.
In 2023, as the Home Secretary, Suella sponsored the introduction of the Illegal Migration Bill into the House of Commons. Among other things, the bill proposes to remove asylum seekers to so-called quote-unquote safe third countries, such as Rwanda, or their country of origin, and block their access to the UK's modern slavery protections. The bill has been widely criticised. It is very aptly named an illegal migration bill because it is exactly that, illegal. It actually violates international law. But as easy as it is to hate on Suella Braverman, just as it was easy to hate on her predecessor, Priti Patel, it is really important, I think, to bear in mind that Suella's role in the Conservative Party is strategic. Suella Braverman is a woman of colour who comes from a migrant background, so what is she doing in this role in the Conservative Party? As we can see, she came up to her position incredibly quickly. She only got elected to the House of Commons in 2015, and then by 2022 she is already the Home Secretary. Let us not think for 1 minute that this means that the Conservative Party are in any way becoming more left-wing. In fact, as we can see very clearly, it is to the opposite. It is reported that ethnic minority representation in the Conservative Party in the UK has grown significantly in recent years. Between 1987 and 2005, the Conservatives had only 3 ethnic minority politicians, but by 2019, the Conservative Party had 23 ethnic minority MPs, including senior politicians such as Rishi Sunak. Although this is still significantly less than the Labour Party, who have traditionally received the majority of ethnic minority votes, this does represent a significant shift in voter behaviour. There is evidence that the Conservative Party is gaining support largely among those of British Indian heritage. Reasons for this change could include the social mobility of this diasporic group, whose pro-business and low-tax economic interests are compatible with conservative neoliberalism. An alternative hypothesis states that ethnic minorities could consider new arrivals a threat to their stability, feeling that they too could become an object of racial discrimination, thereby inclining voters to lean towards a harder stance on managed migration. Or even, perhaps, British Indians and other diasporic minorities believe in the conservative rhetoric.
For me, and I'm not embarrassed to say it, I voted and campaigned for Brexit for sovereignty, but also because I wanted to reduce migration. And for a whole host of reasons. There are structural pressures that mass and rapid migration poses to our country on housing supply, on house prices, on the number of GP places, on school places, we are dealing with more and more people. And I think it's fair and reasonable, in fact, incumbent on a government to take a rational and pragmatic view on the numbers of people coming into this country. So yes, I still stand by the Brexit promise and by our 2019 manifesto pledge to reduce overall numbers on migration.
When in fact, it is neoliberal austerity that cuts funding to the welfare state. It is Brexit that has created an exodus of NHS workers, and it is a lack of regulation on the housing market that pushes prices up. So to distract attention from the government's own failings, from the inherent problems of neoliberalism, MPs are diverting the blame onto the weakest and most vulnerable of the population. This is a particularly successful technique because it acts at once to divide the working class and to ensure that by targeting a vulnerable population, people will not be able to organise to defend themselves. Suella's favourite groups to scapegoat at the moment have proven to be Pakistani men and Albanian victims of human trafficking, both of whom she characterises as criminals, with an emphasis that characterises disgust and dehumanisation.
What I did take away from my conversation with Gérard Darmanin a few weeks ago was that they want to solve this. It is a blight on their Pas-de-Calais region. It's ruining communities. The mainly Albanian people who are coming are not asylum seekers. They are criminal gangs. They are bringing criminality to that region.
Let's just take a little moment to remember that Suella Braverman is a lawyer, and she knows that what she is saying here is slander and it is unfactual. But it is not facts that interest Suella Braverman. No, it is emotion. She is appealing to the worst emotions within us. Furthermore, it's been reported that a third of ethnic minority voters voted for Brexit in 2016. And while this has been attributed to individuals considering that migration pathways are now easier than their parents' or grandparents' experience, this could also be a reaction against the racialisation of European migration strategies, that the EU can migrate easily, while individuals from the rest of the world, particularly from the global south, have very extensive and expensive, difficult visa applications. Well, I think it is interesting why people who are people of colour are starting to vote for a very blatantly racist Conservative Party. I think what's equally interesting is trying to understand the Conservative strategy that's actually at play here. So Suella Braverman, she is at once a racist individual, but at the same time, she is a racialised subject as a woman of colour. Shivanandan argues that people of colour have been used in governmental organisations such as the Commission for Racial Equality to quote-unquote manage racism as a means to negate racial discontent. It's been suggested that the Conservative Party have chosen to include and to actively promote ethnic minority members in the party as proof that racism no longer exists and that we live in a post-racist world.
Of the Metropolitan Police is in doubt tonight after a damning report found it to be institutionally racist, misogynistic and homophobic. Britain's biggest police force was labelled broken and rotten to its core and has suffered a collapse in both public trust and support.
Therefore, they argue, we no longer need to discuss how racialised structures of inequality impact people's abilities to thrive and survive. Now, this is what is really interesting. The reason why Suella and also other people such as Rishi have been so quickly promoted to the top of their parties in positions that they should not be is exactly this, in my opinion. It is strategic and tactical of the Conservative Party to lift up these people of colour and to hold them up as examples to us and say, look, we are not racist. Racism doesn't exist anymore, and this is the proof because we've got our first ever man of colour.
No political judgment, no integrity, no competence, no judgment whatsoever, and that has always been the case. The most extraordinary thing about Rishi Sunak is he was ever able to persuade anyone that he wasn't simply on the level of a junior minister who was in the right place at the right time whenever it came up for promotion. This man should be nowhere near high office.
But as we know, the British people, that having a man as our Prime Minister who is richer than the King does not say anything about actual structural change. It is a consistent rhetoric among the Conservative Party that states that individual hard work achieves financial success. This is a frame that has been used since the days of Margaret Thatcher and the implementation of neoliberal policies in the late 1970s and early 1980s. The use of people of colour such as Suella Braverman in promoting the importance of protecting British borders is strategic because it reframes the idea of ethno-racial minority interests away from interracial solidarity. It legitimizes neoliberal individualism from upward social mobility. So this thereby reaffirms the so-called legitimacy of the neoliberal model, and it renders invisible the salience of race and racial inequality to social mobility. As we know, where you are born and who you are born to has a huge impact on your ability to do well. Yes, it does seem like Suella Braverman has done very well for herself. She is also absolutely ruthless. For Suella's position within the party is both that of an individual co-opted. She is being literally used by the Conservative Party to promote this idea that racism doesn't exist anymore, and she is co-opting within that. So her discourse, if you listen to it, she focuses a lot on the good minority narrative, somebody who is grateful not only to have the right to live in this country, a rhetoric that is also observed among the other ethnic minority senior Conservative Party members as well, and her gratitude to it, as well as her patriotism for it.
My parents came to this country in the 1960s from Kenya and Mauritius. They loved Britain from afar as children of the Commonwealth. It was Britain that offered them security and opportunity as young adults. I'm not embarrassed to say that I love Britain. No Conservative is. It's not racist for anyone, ethnic minority or otherwise, to want to control our borders. It's not bigoted to say that we have too many asylum seekers who are abusing the system. It's not xenophobic to say that mass and rapid migration places pressure on housing, public services, and community relations. I reject the left's argument that it is hypocritical for someone from an ethnic minority to tell these truths.
Which I think is kind of funny, this need for her to reaffirm her pride in Britain and her, literally reaffirming her nationality as if it's something flimsy, because she knows that her nationality is something flimsy that could blow away in the wind. My nationality as a white British woman is never gonna leave me. That's stuck on me like glue. I couldn't get it off if I tried. Which is ironic because actually by saying that she's so proud of Britain and she's so grateful for it, I think she's kind of reaffirming this racism which exists within the country. Like how we have this obsession with saying to people of colour, where is it that you're from? Where is it that you're from? Like, what is it? I'm from Portsmouth. That doesn't mean that I belong in Portsmouth. It doesn't mean that I have to stay in Portsmouth for the rest of my life. It's not about where you are from. It's about where you belong. And people like Suella, she is from London. She is born and bred in London. So why does she feel this need to constantly reaffirm her Britishness if it is not the fact that she knows that the colour of her skin undermines his understanding of what it is to be British? To avoid being othered, Suella has to overcompensate for all of these non-British attributes to mark herself out as a good migrant. I think in a way it's so sad because that is what she has to do to get ahead for herself. You know, I don't know. Can we feel sorry for Suella Braverman? I mean, no, we really, really can't. The racist rhetoric that she uses is absolutely disgusting, and no matter where you are on the political spectrum, that level of hate speech is diabolical and should never be used. But because she is a woman of colour, it is completely strategic. She is ruthless and determined to get ahead, and she knows that this is the way that she's going to be able to do it. And the Conservative Party can really rely on her for this rhetoric, and then she as an individual is scapegoated. You know, but it's not really Suella. Before Suella, we had Priti Patel, and after Suella, who are we going to have next? Like, getting rid of Suella is not going to get rid of the problem. Frantz Fanon, he had this opinion about women like people like Suella, people who belong to the racialised group, but they try to imitate their oppressor, and then by imitating their oppressor, they try to like de-racialise themselves. So by this argument, she is kind of conforming to this very standard conservative ideology as a survival tactic to de-racialise herself. If you've ever read Malcolm X's autobiography, honestly, I mean, it is absolutely shocking. It's one of the best books that I've ever read in my life. But he in my opinion, like his most scathing criticism is reserved for those people that he considers to be, he just thinks that they've been absolutely brainwashed and they've turned into such a position that they actually hate themselves.
Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate? You should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you?
She is even supportive of the British Empire. She says, yes, I'm proud of the British Empire. And she refers to her parents as children of empire.
So your parents are from Mauritius and Kenya. How do you feel about stopping other people arriving here?
I have no qualms about that, absolutely. And again, this is a kind of a common argument trotted out by the left that, you know, because of the colour of my skin and my heritage, I have to think a certain way and I can't declare certain truths on migration.
You annoy them, don't you, because you're not left-wing?
I hope I annoy them. That would be my delight if I'm annoying the left. But no, I disagree with that. My parents came here through safe and legal routes. My mother was recruited by the NHS. My dad came here because he was effectively kicked out of Kenya in the 1960s. But they came here legitimately. That was the policy of the government. They came here, they integrated, they loved this country from afar as children of empire. They don't, by the way, have any qualms about extolling the virtues of the British Empire. It was the British Empire that brought infrastructure, the legal system, the civil service, the military to countries like Mauritius and Kenya. And my parents are so proud. On my mum's side there, I think it's her great uncle and auntie fought with the Allies in World War II, and they were so proud of that. So I think, you know, children of empire, there's obviously a mixed picture, and obviously there are bad things about empire. But
history is complex.
History is complex and nuanced, and I'm not going to apologise for empire. I'm not going to apologise for our past. History
Should we
is
be proud of empire? Should we be prouder?
I am proud of the British Empire.
Yeah,
yes.
She speaks of empire in the singular as if it was omnipresent. I think the very way that she speaks, extolling the virtues, don't have any qualms about what are you trying to do, Suella? Like, who are you? This is the 21st century. You can speak like a normal person, please. But no, she still has this very deep embedded colonialization, this self-hatred. So one of the things that Frantz Fanon said is the process of racialization was a process in which the colonizer made the colonialized subject genuinely feel like they were inferior, and then therefore this justified colonialism, this justified the actions of colonialism, and it was a way for example, British or French people to like literally displace their guilt. So the British didn't feel guilty anymore about this horrific, about the horrible levels of violence that they committed.
We look back on that period now as just awful, don't we?
I think there was some good bits and there were some less than good bits.
You look at the fact that we introduced parliamentary democracy to a lot of countries, the sort of civil service system of government, which all of these countries, or a lot of these countries, are still using today.
The British put in a system that actually brought about education, that actually brought about partial emancipation of women, that actually brought about democracy, that made India where it is today. It's time to stop seeing empire as a dirty word.
But this ideology was internalized in the colonialized subject themselves, which is what happens with Suella. Like, it is possible as well, as a side note, that different people were treated very differently under the British Empire. The British ruled with a system of divide and conquer, and I know of certain peoples who were like ethnic minorities living in a country who were treated very differently by the British Empire than they were by the people who actually ran the country beforehand. And so it's possible that certain peoples might have had access to different things, like access to education or access to certain employment opportunities within the colonial service that they wouldn't have had before. So it is possible that as Suella's parents were of the sub-Indian diaspora, but they were living in sub-Saharan Africa, it is possible that they would have been treated better than the African peoples. And that's actually, as she said, that her father was actually forced to flee Kenya, I think around the time of independence, when the country became socialist, and certain people who had accrued a lot of wealth, for example, members of the Indian diaspora, were forced to kind of leave the country and had a lot of their property taken away from them. So it's important to remember that when Suella says, oh yeah, my parents are really happy about the British Empire, her parents would not have been treated in the same way as a black African would. So as much as it is enjoyable to hate on Suella for being outrageously racist, she's just fulfilling a role. You know, she's not the one that has created the racialized system in the first place, but she is the one who is taking advantage of it. And a final thing I'm going to say about her mother is her mother was actively recruited by the NHS, because the NHS, from the very first time that the NHS was even brought into fruition, it was facing a staffing crisis, and they desperately needed to recruit people from overseas. And so they recruited especially women from the so-called Commonwealth countries. As we know with the whole Windrush scandal, how badly that worked out. Suella says it was the British Empire that brought infrastructure, the legal system and the civil service. This infrastructure, the Conservative claim goes, acts as justification for mass murder, incarceration, slavery, forced servitude and financial exploitation to such an extent that areas like Bangladesh were transformed from the 1600s as the finest and most fruitful country in the world to a country that is now synonymous with famine. The British people will never stop talking about trains in India.
There is a kind of half-assed liberal idea that while colonialism wasn't great, at least Britain gave India the trains. And maybe that's something they should be thankful for. Unfortunately, Britain also stole $45 trillion from India, all the while exploiting religious divisions between the Hindu and Muslim communities and further turning them against each other. And those beloved railways, they became the sites of mass slaughter while Britain sat back and watched India buy trains from them. Between 1854 and 1947, over 14,000 locomotives were imported from the UK to India. Initially, Indians weren't even allowed to work on the trains. They were staffed entirely by white people, from the board directors to the ticket collectors. The railways made little profit, but British shareholders who invested in its construction made vast returns, guaranteed at the expense of Indian taxpayers who had to pay for it. India's railways were basically like someone burgling your house, building a ramp to wheel all your stuff out, sending you a bill for that ramp, and expecting a round of applause at the end of it.
But Suella, as records show us, she does not care for truth or fact, and when presented with it, the woman claims that it doesn't exist or that it is not significant.
You can answer my question. What did he mean by not adopting our values? Yeah, people who are coming here illegally are breaking our laws. They are criminals and they don't have a right to be here. That is at odds with our values of upholding the rule of law, generosity,
but as we
and
know,
helping
people who come here,
people.
it's not illegal, is it, to come here on a boat?
Vulnerable white English girls, sometimes in care, sometimes who are in challenging circumstances, being pursued and raped and drugged and harmed by gangs of British Pakistani men who've worked in child abuse rings or networks.
Do you also accept, though, that grooming gangs are not necessarily just Pakistani? So the Home Office report in 2020 found grooming gangs most commonly white, and despite some of the high-profile cases that we described, they said that the links between ethnicity and this form of offending could not be proven.
Certain ethnic groups, and I say British Pakistani males, who hold cultural values totally at odds with British values, who see women in a demeaned and illegitimate way and pursue an outdated and frankly heinous approach in terms of the way they behave. We've got to stamp that out with criminal law and proper safeguarding, and we're only going to do that if, as a society, we face up to the facts and the truth of what's actually going on.
But to say, right, that there is something within British Pakistani culture that is at odds with British values. She creates this racialised object who threatens what she terms to be British values through their inherent and therefore permanent cultural characteristics, and that is what racism is, ascribing a characteristic that is cultural or biological as permanent and therefore irrevocable. She creates, through this process, the British Pakistani man as a violent and perverted threat who she says has an obsession with young white women. Oh my gosh, it is very important to note here that the cultural characteristics to which she refers are a very thin veil for Islamophobia. This demonstrates that although biological racism has been disregarded, we know it's not true. So now instead we replaced it with cultural racism, this idea that our culture is better than other people's. So although that Suella Braverman is a lawyer and she knows what she is saying, when we actually look at what she says, it is a repeated and deliberate technique of her to refer to asylum seekers as illegal migrants. There is no such thing. The woman is a lawyer. She knows that there is no such thing as an illegal person. There is only an illegal act. What a person is irregular. No person can be illegal. In the role as Home Secretary, she is responsible for the security of the state. And so by constructing asylum seekers illegal, she emphasises their undesirability. Another thing that she loves to talk about, and just a final thing that I'm going to say, is she loves to talk about the law-abiding majority. Oh, that smug woman.
For the law-abiding majority of Britons.
So, what is going on with Suella? It's not only what is going on with Suella, it's also what is going on within the Conservative Party. And their desire to prove that racism no longer exists by actively promoting women of colour and people of colour. So when we criticise Suella, which of course we should do because the woman is absolutely off her rocker, when we criticise her, we must understand her role within that as a racialised subject who is at once racist.
Our mission was to use the law to prove that lying in politics is a criminal offence with a maximum sentence of life imprisonment.
दूर देश से आया फिरंगी कहे कि मैं करता व्यापार एक हाथ में लिए तराजू दूजे में थी छुपी कटार